Okay, so any of us need to accept. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. And it's my pleasure to introduce this technical briefing. My name is Xavier Frank. I work in the Technical University of Catalonia and I will be moderating this session. And we have a very, very interesting and challenging technical briefing about grounded theory, decoding grounded theory for software engineering. This technical briefing will be presented by the Professor Rashina Hoda, who is an Associate Dean and Deputy Director at the Monash University in Melbourne. Since the tutorial is 75 minutes, I will not lose any other minute in introducing Rashina, who is well known to everyone at this moment, I think. And please, Rashina, proceed with the tutorial. The floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Xavier, and welcome everybody. Welcome to the tutorial, the technical briefing. Thanks for being here. Okay, I'm going to start with an acknowledgement of country that I'm learning to do here in Australia. And it goes something like this. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land from which I present today, the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I also extend that respect to all the people present here today. This artwork that you see, this beautiful artwork, is taken from the series Acknowledgement of Country, which is available on the ABC channel. All right, so here's today's plan. As Xavier said, it's 75 minutes. And because there's quite a lot that I want to share with you about grounded theory, I'm going to be doing the presentation in the first part for about 50 minutes rather, not 15. What I'd request you to do is either save your questions for later or also feel free to type them into the Zoom chat while I present. I'll obviously be looking at it after I present, but if you had a thought and you wanted to save it in the chat, feel free to do that. I've also got slide numbers on, so if you wanted to refer to a particular slide number, again, feel free to use that. Then we're going to be going into a question and answer and open discussion, and everything is going to be here on Zoom. So there's no interaction with Cloud, and from now onwards, once you've found your way here, everything's on Zoom. And I'm hoping that's going to be about 25 minutes. And then finally, if you will please spare 3 minutes to give me feedback on this particular technical briefing, that would be really appreciated. So I have to let you know that recording is in progress so that people who join in later for the recorded session can watch this. So if you're not comfortable being recorded, then feel free to keep your cameras off. If you are comfortable being recorded, please keep your cameras on. I would love to see you and interact with you in due time. Cool. So for me, it's really always about the people over process, even if that process is grounded theory. So I have to start with who's in the room and who's here right now with us. I'm going to try here and put this poll out for you, which goes something like this. The question is, what best describes your GT experience? So choices are, this will be my introduction to grounded theory. Yay, in that case, I'm very, very happy and lucky. I have read about GT, but not tried it. I am currently conducting my first grounded theory study. I have successfully conducted one grounded theory study. I've successfully conducted multiple grounded theory studies. I regularly conduct, review, and/or supervise grounded theory studies. And I've tried grounded theory, but it did not work for me. So see which options work for you. We've got voting in progress, and you can find again the poll in your Zoom menu bar. So hopefully you can access that. Cool. All right, I think that's everybody. Ending the poll now. And all right, can you see this? So we've got, let me see if I scroll it over on this side. Okay, so what we've got here is a majority of the people have read about grounded theory, but not tried it. Okay, so someone shaking their head. Maybe you can't see the poll, but I'll read the results out to you. So majority of the people have read about grounded theory, but they've not tried it. The next most popular one is, this will be my introduction to grounded theory. Yay! I am so pleased and so fortunate to be able to do that for you. Then we've got 3 people who've successfully conducted 1 grounded theory study, 3 others who conducted multiple grounded theory studies, 1 who regularly conducts and supervises grounded theory studies, and 1 who is currently doing their first grounded theory study. Amazing. All right. Can you still see? Hopefully you can still see my presentation. At any time, if something doesn't look right, feel free to unmute yourself and let me know. Thank you. Okay, so let's get straight into it. What is grounded theory? So grounded theory, the easiest description, is a sociological research method, process, or life cycle if you want, or a set of steps to conduct research. It was introduced by sociologist Barney Glaser and Anselm Strauss in 1967. And that, what you see on the corner, is the book that was the discovery of grounded theory, which actually introduced grounded theory to the world, which I also happen to have here with all my notes. You can see it against the blurring. And what Barney Glaser and Anselm Strauss managed to do was they marked a strong resurgence of qualitative research in sociology with this book and with the introduction of grounded theory. Because around the mid-1900s, what you had was a very strong dominance of quantitative research, and it was seen as legitimate science. Everything else, especially qualitative, was seen as anecdotal, and people were not, ready to accept it as legitimate science. So with the robustness and the systematic nature of grounded theory, Barney Glaser and Anselm Strauss really managed to pull it up back into being a very, very well acknowledged and accepted method. So as I said, it's systematic and rigorous. It focuses on in-depth study of a social phenomena. That's how it's set up, because it comes from social science. And it's an inductive approach to evidence-based theory generation, which means you are collecting up evidence from the real world and building up the theory bottom up, right? That's the inductive part. It has a powerful data analysis method at its core. So grounded theory is sometimes also used only for the data analysis side of things, not as a whole research method. And it comes in 3 versions. So what I showed you is often referred to as the classic version or the Glaserian version, which is the original version in 1967. Now in 1990, what happened was Strauss, who was the other founder of grounded theory, decided to diverge in a way and come up with his own way of doing grounded theory, which then came to be known as the Strauss-Corbinian method in combination with Julian Corbin. And this was a little bit more of a structured approach to grounded theory. And then in 2006, we see the constructivist grounded theory come through from Kathy Shamaz. And the main difference there was the fact that she talked about presenting grounded theory as a subjective way of looking at things, which means who is conducting the research makes a difference to what the outcome of the research will be. So these are your references here. So typically we have 3 versions, and people new to grounded theory are often expected to understand these 3 versions and then differentiate and decide between them. So what is grounded theory, the actual method? First off, the term grounded in grounded theory refers to the empirical or evidence-based nature of the theory that is the output of the process, right? So it's grounded in evidence, and the theory is the output of the process. This here is basically my attempt as a software engineer to try and make sense of the method in a flowchart and form in a diagram. This is typically, how software engineers think. If there's a process, there's got to be a diagram. So I tried to do that back in the day, and it's part of this paper in Empirical Software Engineering 2011. And it kind of goes through the idea of, you start with a minor review of literature in an area of interest, you collect some data, you see that cyclic nature of stuff going on there, you come up with a core category, another round of selective coding, sorting, and so on, right? So we'll go through some of the details in a bit. But interestingly enough, during my PhD, looking back at it, I was looking at two types of processes. One was agile software development, which was the topic of my research. And second was grounded theory, which was the method. And interestingly, both of them have stayed with me and have been co-parts of my research since then. So yes, I'm a process person. I love to study processes, whether it's the research method or the software development method. All right, now there's another part of it is what is grounded theory in terms of the outcome? What can you expect out as an outcome of this method? So theory, the way I like to think of it in simple ways or simple terms is key patterns in the data. What do you see as the key patterns? So these are called concepts or subcategories or categories in the data. And what are the relationships between these patterns? So what are the emergent hypotheses? What links are we starting to see between them? And a while ago, this cartoon sort of came up on Twitter, which went something like this. If you have disparate points of data, this looks something like this. When you start to put some meaning into it, that becomes information. When you start to connect the information with each other in meaningful ways, it becomes knowledge. When you find something really interesting and insightful in that pieces of information that's connected, that's insight, because not all data and not all bits of information are equally important. So you might have insights about certain parts. When you connect certain insights together and start to see, wow, this is really starting to make sense, that becomes wisdom. So this is, just to be clear, this is not me, this is from Twitter. And if you didn't go through this systematic process though, and if you had gone back right to the second step of information, and at that stage, if you took a wild guess at what the information is saying to me, then it would look something like this, which is a conspiracy theory. It's not a grounded theory. A grounded theory will be that systematic method of going through all of the steps and coming up with a theory bottom up based on evidence. It's not what's in your head, it's what's in the data. So as I said, a grounded theory, the outcome of the process is a systematically generated theory that is coming out through a super rigorous process. It's not a hypothesis, it's a theory. Okay, with that, you will see the pace. Usually I try to take time and talk to people, but I am under a bit of time pressure because I'm going to try and go through a lot of material, but then hopefully when we open up the floor, we can, have an open discussion and chat some more. So grounded theory in software engineering is getting super popular. It's primarily being used to investigate human and social aspects, right? And it typically tends to focus on complex phenomenon. You don't typically get a grounded theory in something trivial. People like to, really look at the big questions with this one. Because grounded theory, in my opinion, is a deep dive. It's not one of those shallow sort of snorkeling experiences. It really is a deep dive into any particular topic. So some of the complex phenomena that have been studied in software engineering using GT in the past include software process improvement. This is Coleman and O'Connor, 2007. Customer collaboration, this was one of my first papers published with a complete theory. Self-organizing teams, 2012 or 13 at the end of that. Reconciling perspectives, again, a great paper by Steve Adolph, Philippe Crafton, and Wendy Hall in 2012. Software product management challenges, Agile Architecture, multi-level project management challenges, daily stand-up, Agile transformation, self-assignment most recently, Scrum variations, role of the Scrum Master, and role of the project manager. So see, these are some, selected list of grounded theory studies in software engineering. There are way more really good ones as well. But I have to obviously pick some to go through today. And what I'm going to do is show you the end product of these studies, because I think for people to get interested in performing a process, it's also important to be able to visualize the end product that they're going to be looking to achieve themselves. So that's what I'm going to do here today. And I've taken some of the images from these papers duly cited. I hope I don't get into trouble for sharing them on this format, but I really did want it to be more than just my own papers. So hopefully you see that point there, and share it more widely. Okay. So this one's, as I said before, this is the using grounded theory to understand software process improvement, a study of Irish software product companies. And we're not going to go into a whole lot of detail. I just wanted to give you a feel of what the end product looks like. So yes, boxes and arrows, you'll see that a lot. And why that is these little, the rectangles there essentially will be concepts and categories that have emerged through the iterative process, and the arrows are the relationships that the people would have eventually discovered over, following the systematic and rigorous process over time. This one's the grounded theory of lack of customer involvement, one of my own, and this talks about, as you will see, it has the category in the center, which is the lack of customer involvement. And then it also has ideas around what were the causes of the lack of customer involvement, what were the consequences, what were the contingencies at the bottom, which is, those workarounds that the practitioners came up with when customers didn't collaborate. So you get a sense of the fact that this is a theory that explains the various facets of what it means to have a customer that's not involved, right? And how to go about, working in that context. All right, this one here is the Reconciling Perspectives by Steve Adolph and colleagues. And it talks about how people manage the process of software development as an act of reconciling perspectives. And this, you'll see a slightly UML style, use of certain shapes to define process versus artifacts versus, certain arrows mean something. So you see the engineering influence start to come in on grounded theory as people use this to visualize. This one here is the self-organizing roles of agile teams. The roles that I found as part of my PhD study. Again, not going to go into all detail here, but underneath each of these sit a rich description of each of the roles with all of the details of how that gets played out and so on. So what you see as the end product is a super compressed and succinct version of heaps and heaps of data that sits underneath all of these theories. This one is, again, an excellent piece of work, Grounded Theory of Agile Architecture, 2015 by Michael Waterman. Michael was actually starting his PhD by the time I was finishing up at the same lab. So we had fun times discussing some of his work. And this one also, it won the Distinguished Paper Award at ICSE. So an excellent paper, very much an exemplar to look at for grounded theory studies. Another one of mine, and this is the multi-level project management challenges. I'll quickly highlight one thing here is these bits over here talk about the multiple levels of challenges that people face. Up in here in the green, these are all again based on the study data, so evidence from the data. The last column in the blue, this is after I've got all of the results. I've compared it to the software engineering book of knowledge in terms of what are the project management activities in the book of knowledge that map to the challenges I found in the study. So that would have been done afterwards, right? So that's how grounded theory works in terms of relating back to literature, is you tend to typically do it afterwards, not as a lead up to the theory. So you come up with original theory and then see, all right, is this making sense to the rest of the world? So that's one example. This is another fun favorite one of mine from Victoria Stray and people in 2016, the daily stand-up meeting. I mean, look at this. As a quick look, it looks like a circuit diagram, right? It's amazing. It's so detailed, and it goes through all of the details of what is the meeting activity that goes on in daily stand-up, what are the team characteristics, what are the outcomes, what are the individual characteristics, and then Victoria's got these lovely lines that are in different colors going. If it's a black, it's a, there's A affects B, on an aggregate level. If it's a green, it's A positively affects B. If it's a red, it A negatively affects B, and so on. So these are like what we see. One snapshot is potentially months and years of work that ends up becoming one picture that you see here, and then you start to be creative about how you visualize these things with colors, with different boxes, and so on. Moving swiftly along, there's the Grounded Theory of Becoming Agile 2017. Again, it's about transformations, and one slight different thing that I'd like to highlight here is you've still got the boxes and arrows which capture the main categories and the relationships, but we also got the H1, H2 going on, right? So those are hypotheses. And these are sort of relationships that are not just explanatory, they're slightly more predictive in that they're suggesting, okay, not only did we see this happening, but this is based on what we know, this is what's likely to happen. So to give you an example, one of the hypotheses was that the reflective practices for an agile team will be the last one to mature, right? So that's a predictive style hypothesis based on the best information that we have from the data. Again, very fortunate to receive the Distinguished Paper Award at XC for this one. So this is all being sort of shared with the intention to get people excited about grounded theory, but also to let you know that it's really possible to achieve very high quality work with grounded theory and also get published in mainstream software engineering venues. So don't let anyone tell you that you can't. Then there's the Grounded Theory of Making Self-Assignment Work in Agile Team by Zainab. Zainab is a final year PhD student at the University of Auckland, doing amazing work looking at Agile teams. And as you can see from the size of the theory visualization here, it's super comprehensive, goes into heaps of details around how self-assignment works in Agile teams, around conditions and strategies and so forth. Okay, this one here is Developers Identifying Design Problems, again, a Distinguished Paper Award 2018 at XC. And this is Yogeshwar Shastri, another PhD student of mine, looking at the role of the project manager. Okay, so what makes for a good grounded theory paper, in my opinion? I've got two main elements here. One is the fact that there is clear evidence of systematic and rigorous application of the grounded theory method, right? Especially the fact that there's a robust and interleaved data collection and analysis going on. And that should be really clearly obvious. And that's what's common in all of these papers. And the second is a very effective presentation of the actual theory outcome, typically including a theory statement and a diagram. So I often tell my students, if you get to a point where you can draw this out clearly, you've got it really well in your head, right? So that really helps convey your point as well. Moving swiftly on, we're going to why. So we've looked at the what grounded theory is, what grounded theory outcomes look like, and what a good grounded theory paper looks like. We're going to look at the why. Why do we want to, consider grounded theory? So cut to the chase, I'm going to give you 10 reasons to try grounded theory if you haven't done this already. And I know a number of you actually haven't, so you're still thinking. First off, grounded theory is one of those methods that allows you to address meaningful, fundamental, and complex questions. And God knows we need that right now in our community. I'm not going to say much more about that, but yes, grounded theory definitely can help in this regard. It allows you to study human and social aspects of software engineering. It can help you to conduct in-depth and multifaceted empirical investigation. So it can be, it can stretch in size, as we'll see in a bit. It allows you to leverage multiple data types and sources. And now a lot of different methods can claim to do this. But what grounded theory does in addition is that it allows you to achieve rich and multi-layered qualitative analysis. As you would have seen from the examples of the outcome, the analysis and the type of analysis that you get is super rich. And to present high quality findings, this one's really important. Number 7, balance research rigor with industrial relevance. So all of the theories that we saw are all based out of real empirical work. Yes, so people going out in the industry, collecting data of real practitioners and reporting that as a theory from the ground up. And hardly any other method can claim to be doing that. It also allows you to lay the theoretical foundations of a problem space, right? So you could be part of a team that's laying down the foundations and then using that to go into the solution mode and then design solutions and tools and techniques to help address the problem space. But first, you must understand the problem space really well. Obviously, number 9, develop novel empirical grounded theories. And finally, recommend guidelines to impact practice, because this is also practical. It obviously should come up with ideas for practice to help practitioners. All right, so you're like, okay, Rashina, that's a good selling pitch, but grounded theory, it's not easy, okay, is it? Or at least that's what I hear. So let's look at the state of practice when software engineering researchers attempt grounded theory. I'm sure everyone knows about this paper. It's the Grounded Theory in Software Engineering Research, a critical review and guidelines from 2016, class Paul and Brian's paper. And this did a review of the top venues of software engineering publishing grounded theory papers from 1995 to 2015. And what we clearly see is that there is a rise in the popularity of software engineering research. But unfortunately, what it also reported was poor quality. So around the review, there was not enough detail of the method or the version of grounded theory that was being used. People were combining practices a la carte without reference to any particular guidelines. And there was also suspected method abuse and misuse. Thankfully, there were a handful of exemplars that they also pointed out, but these were fewer than the not so good ones, unfortunately. So that has troubled me, to be honest. I was like, oh no, this is not a good report card. This is kind of like a D-. This is not very good for the community. So why is there a poor show for a grounded theory in software engineering? And I've thought about this a lot, and based on my own experience of practicing it, supervising it, reviewing grounded theory and so on, I've come up with a few patterns that I think describe some of the most common challenges software engineering researchers face when they are attempting grounded theory. All right, so the first one I call eager but not equipped. So software engineering researchers are interested in using grounded theory, but they find it difficult to understand and apply, right? So you want to do it, but you're like, oh, this is too complex, Rashina, I can't do it. Second one is no version control. So obviously there are 3 versions that you have to not only understand grounded theory, the basic, but also the 3 versions, and then have to decide between the 3. And then, be like, okay, this one makes sense, and that's what I'm going to go ahead with. But most software engineering researchers are either unaware of the fact that there are 3 versions or unclear about how these vary and then how to apply them in practice. Then there is what I call scope confusion. And this is to do with the fact that researchers are confused about, okay, are we going to do the whole thing? Are we going to apply the whole grounded theory study? Or are we only going to be applying grounded theory for the data analysis? So what's going on? And as I see this as a reviewer quite a lot, in that sometimes people would have used it only for the data analysis, but the way they present it sounds like they're presenting the full theory, and then they get into trouble, right? So knowing which one you've done and how to present it is, again, very important. DIY gone wrong, okay? So as software engineers try to do grounded theory, inevitably they try and adapt it, okay? When they adapt it, it's very difficult to do without clear guidelines, and it's even more difficult to justify it to the reviewers as to why they've adapted it, yeah? Then there's this one, which is the facade. Okay, and the facade is where software engineering researchers do not apply grounded theory carefully, but they claim to do so. And I've seen some of these, and there's a super, they typically have one of those model diagrams as a result, right? So the boxes and arrows, but if you read into the process and the application details, it's very, very easy to see that there's not a lot behind that particular figure or model. And one wonders how people came up with that in the first place. So this, I think, is the closest to what we call method misuse or abuse, is the facade. The opposite of the facade is what I call poor presentation. Okay, and this is where they've actually done a really good grounded theory study, but they've totally mucked up the presentation. And as a reviewer, I feel so bad about these ones, because I'm like, oh, it was such a great job. If only you'd presented it well, if in every which way, we could have, and of course, if it's a journal context, you try and give them that feedback to bring it back on track. Some, improve, some, don't. But poor presentation is, again, a rampant problem. This one's evidence gatekeeping. So throw back to one of my favorite books and movies, The Hobbit. And the idea here is, well, you've got all this gold of evidence, right? This beautiful evidence. You can't share it, or you don't want to share it. So how do you provide adequate evidence without compromising participant confidentiality? This is a huge problem for qualitative researchers in general, but grounded theorists in particular. And I'll see, again, a lot of people fumble on this one. And the last one, but not the least, extreme reviews. And every so often I'll be on either side, but I'll see either overly trusting reviews or like, oh, there's a model, they must have done it right. Or it's totally harsh, and it's like, extremely harsh because it's a grounded theory study. Somehow the bar is raised and people are expected to perform at, amazing standards that are not realistic sometimes. Okay, so what's happening here? What is at the, sort of the heart of this problem? This is how I try to make sense of this. I think there is, and we need to acknowledge this, there is a misalignment between grounded theory as it was designed for and by sociologists to study social phenomena. And it's done well for grounded software engineers for a while to try and do that, to study human and social aspects. But we have to really acknowledge the fact that software engineering research isn't conducted by sociologists, it's conducted by socio-technical researchers to study socio-technical phenomena. So that is the misalignment. And apart from the facade issue where people are not doing it properly, a lot of the other issues come back to this misalignment, in my opinion. So quick look at the traditional GT method limitations and opportunities in software engineering research. So as I said, it has been written by and for sociologists. Obviously, they weren't going to be writing it for us. We've decided to take it over and start using it. That's not their problem. But that also means that for the average software engineering researcher, it may not be as accessible because it's written in a particular way, in a particular narrative with particular language examples that is native to sociology. Then there's the issue of assumed expertise and experience. No one seems to be talking about this, right? Software engineers were trained in technical areas. A lot of us, most of us are not as much trained in social, theoretical, and qualitative research. And yet we are somehow expected to, start with grounded theory and run with it without any background or training. That's not very appropriate. It needs to be acknowledged. Again, the 3 versions is a bit of a problem because, again, it raises the entry bar for the barrier for software engineering researchers to understand 3 first and then decide. Then it's used for the fact that it's used for theory generation, but we've seen from multiple studies and multiple papers that software engineering researchers are also interested in using it for data analysis only. Maybe they don't even want to produce a final theory. They just want to use it for the data analysis part as part of something else, like a case study or a survey research or something. And we'll see how we can do that in a bit. And was designed, as I said before, to study social phenomena, of course, whereas software engineering is not strictly social, but rather very much socio-technical. And it was designed to use traditional data and traditional data collection and analysis techniques like, with interviews and observations. Now, software engineering practitioners and researchers have since then introduced a multitude of different types of data collection techniques and analysis techniques, like sentiment analysis, or we've got, open source data. And we are in a unique position to be able to leverage that. And in fact, that's the opportunity that we can provide back to grounded theory and I think really add to it. So what all of this is really pointing to is the fact that you can't use an old map to explore a new world, as Albert Einstein once said. The old map here being a sociological research method, to explore a new world being a socio-technical research. research world, which is not just software engineering, to be honest. These days, almost every domain has some or the other level of socio-technical involvement. Okay, which brings me to introducing socio-technical grounded theory. And this basically is a variant of grounded theory for software engineering, right? Which is what I'm proposing. And it's a socio-technical variant, so it can apply to other socio-technical areas like information systems, human-computer interaction, artificial intelligence, and so on. And it's I've summarized this currently in this paper, which is I'm working on it. The blurring, you can't see through the blurring, but it's a socio-technical grounded theory for software engineering, which is what it says on the screen right now. And there is the archive, it's linked to it. So it's freely available for people to read and feel free to practice as well. If you've read the paper, feel free to give me some feedback in the chat. I'm happy to talk about it. Okay, now, before I get into socio-technical grounded theory, it's important to describe what is meant by socio-technical research, right? It's been talked about a lot, and we all acknowledge that software engineering is socio-technical, but what does it mean for it to be a socio-technical research area? So I've come up with this socio-technical research framework, which has 4 dimensions: the phenomena, the actors, the researcher, and then the data, tools, and techniques. Okay, so let's walk through this. For socio-technical phenomena, I'm defining it basically, and it's well defined. I'm kind of summarizing it, where the human and the technological interactions are so tightly coupled that studying one without studying the other does not make sense, and it makes for an incomplete investigation. You have to consider both the human as well as the technical aspects to really understand that phenomena. The domain and the actors. So the domain, like as I said before, software engineering, computer science, HCI, all of these are socio-technical domain. But increasingly, if you look at even medicine or health or retail or business and banking, everywhere you've got more and more technologies creeping in, which makes it a bit more socio-technical than it was before. Socio-technical actors include software engineers, data scientists, but also software users. Then, of course, the researchers, which is us. A socio-technical researcher needs to have requisite knowledge and skills, okay, in social sciences, philosophy, qualitative research, theory development, as well as the regular technical background that you may have. And at this point, you're like, I'm out, Rashina, I can't do like 5 degrees in these different. All right, we don't need like in-depth PhDs into these things. And then my next slide, I'll be talking about what exactly do we need from each of these areas to get started with grounded theory as a bare minimum, okay? And also the fact that this doesn't have to be one person. So it could be one person who knows all of this, or it could be a team of people. So you could have a sociologist on your team. You could have somebody who is really good with theory development on your team, and so on. So it could be an interdisciplinary team of people performing it. And finally, there's the socio-technical data, tools, and techniques. So we're talking about primarily qualitative data in this case, but also quantitative as a supplementary. And traditional methods like interviews and observations, but also modern methods like data mining, natural language processing, sentiment analysis, and so on. So this is the the socio-technical research framework. I had to kind of define this as a side product in order to get to the point, which is what is socio-technical grounded theory. Because my friends and great colleagues will not, leave me alone. They were like, no, Rashina, you must define it. So this is how it came up. Interesting side story. Okay, so now that we've defined socio-technical, a socio-technical grounded theory is an iterative and incremental research method for conducting socio-technical research, which we've now defined, using traditional and modern data and research techniques to generate novel, useful, parsimonious, and modifiable theories. Okay, that's the 1-sentence definition. I love my 1-sentence definitions for everything. And the main features here are interleaved rounds of basic data collection and analysis, advanced data collection analysis and theory development, which comes in 2 modes. There's emergent or the structured, and you can choose from them. And it's primarily inductive, as grounded theory was traditionally, but it also acknowledges some deductive and abductive reasoning involved in the development of theory in socio-technical grounded theory. Okay, so as I said before, I'll talk about the requisite skills for a socio-technical grounded theory researcher. All right, at the bare minimum, philosophical foundations, we must understand things like ontology, epistemology, and research paradigm. In the paper that's available on arXiv, I have a very convenient table that gives a very handy definition with examples of each of these areas, okay? So that's like the bare minimum, but of course, you're encouraged to go and read more about it and learn more about it. Because, okay, side observation, very quick one. Most of us are either PhDs or working towards a PhD, okay? What is a PhD stand for? It's a doctorate in philosophy, yes. So it's a doctorate philosophy in software engineering. That may be a technical domain, but at the bare minimum, as PhDs, we're all meant to understand a little bit of philosophy. It's okay. And not only okay, it's very much desirable. So I try to break it down in terms that is palatable and easy for software engineering researchers. Not to say, you know, we've got some fantastic philosophers amongst us, but for people who are struggling to get started, I've tried to break it down to the bare minimum. And qualitative research skills I talked about, which is being able to design protocols, design and collect the data either through, say, interviews or surveys or whatever. The grounded theory data analysis procedures that you learn over time, and the relevant data analysis if you're adding any additional analysis like sentiment analysis or crawling of and cleaning of data and natural language processing and so on, if your study requires that. Then there's what's called theoretical sensitivity. And in very simple terms, it's basically, can you think in theoretical ways, right? So it's not just, the concept, it's not just the substantive ideas that the participants will tell you, it's also being able to abstract it to higher levels, which is the core of the grounded theory method, and then conceptualize it to lead it to a theory level. And this can be built by reading about theory development and reading theories. Like I shared with you before, a lot of grounded theories, the more you read these, the more you get acclimatized to what it means to develop theory, right? So that is theoretical sensitivity. Similarly, there's socio-technical sensitivity. So being, familiar with the relevant background in socio-technical aspects. This one comes easy to us because most of us software engineers are trained in the technical backgrounds. And then there's the idea of domain knowledge, which can be different to the socio-technical aspect. Because if you're doing a socio-technical grounded theory of, say, technology use in medicine or banking, the domain is medicine or banking, you might need a subject matter expert in that case. So you don't have to go do a PhD in all of these again, as I said, but there's a little bit required from each of these. So I hope I'm not scaring anybody off, but to be honest, if you want to be successful, then this is kind of how it goes. And I'm horribly late, running really late. I think I was being really ambitious with what I was trying to cover, but this does mean I'm going to move in, eat into a little bit of a discussion time. But if people are happy to stick around, I'm also happy to stick around a little bit longer. That's an advantage of being on Zoom. Okay, so what are the methods and steps and procedures of the socio-technical grounded theory method? This is the basic stage, which is the data collection and analysis. You've got what's called the lean literature review. You've got a study preparation and piloting of that study. So you pilot with a few people, like 3 to 5 people. You pilot your protocols and so forth. And even from those 3 to 5 interviews or so on, there can be a number of emerging concepts and categories already coming up. Next, we move into this iterative cycle of what I'm calling the basic data collection analysis. And at the end of that, you come up with some strong categories and some emerging hypotheses. As you can see at the bottom, try to visualize what the output looks like. You could, at this stage, decide to be like, all right, this is it. That's all I'm doing. I'm going to report these and that's it. Or you can then continue on to the advanced stage, which is theory development. And at this point, you can choose from one of 2 modes. So one is the emergent mode and the other is the structured mode. So the emergent mode here is you've got targeted data collection and analysis, and then theoretical structuring. And the structured mode is structured data collection analysis followed by theoretical integration. In both cases, either ways, you end up with a mature theory as first step, and then a structured and integrated mature theory at the last step. And then obviously, as I said, alluded to in the past, that towards the end, you do a more targeted literature review to see how your findings compare to what has been done before. And that's a targeted literature review. And then you'd be reporting that theory, right? So that's it. That's all of it, the whole of the socio-technical grounded theory on that one page there, with all of its methods and steps. And we're going to walk through that in a bit. So hang in with me. All right, so the literature review. You've got the lean literature review here, as I said before. And this is done during the basic stage. It's lightweight. It's meant to basically be done to identify the gaps in literature and to motivate the need for the study. So for example, if you did a quick search, sat through a couple of days of actually searching through some of the main databases and see that a topic that you were wanting to do has a well-established theory in that area, then you probably don't want to do a grounded theory on the same thing, unless you think there's a different angle to it that you can pursue or some other reason for it. The other one is the targeted literature review, which you do later on, as I said before, and it's done in the advanced stages. And the idea is to then compare and situate your original findings in light of existing literature and then present it in the reported theory. So this is no excuse to say, oh, I did a grounded theory, therefore I don't need to look at literature. That's a myth. You still need to look at literature, but in this particular way. So a lean literature review before and a targeted one later. So your study results are still quite original. Okay, so the basic stage is essentially iterative and interleaved and incremental rounds of sampling. And this initial sampling can be any kind of sampling to begin with, which is convenience or purposive sampling or random or representative sampling, any kind of sampling to start off with. And then there's basic data collection, analysis using open coding and constant comparison. So some of these, unfortunately, obviously we can't be going into the details, but there's more in the paper, but there's obviously going to be more in the books that have been written, but also the book that I'm writing on the same topic. So then there's basic memoing, which is the researcher taking notes and reflecting on what are the main concepts emerging, what are the links between these concepts. So the basic stage ends with strong categories and emerging relationships. The advanced stage, as I said, you can select from two modes of theory development. One is the emergent mode, and this is typically applicable for a broad, when you have a broad initial topic. And the other one is a structured one, where if you started with a relatively narrow topic, the structure of the theory will be staring you in the face and quite early in the process. And then you continue with that structure for the rest of the time to saturate the categories. And that's why it's called structured. Whereas with emergent, what happens is the categories are quite strong, but the links are not very obvious. The structure of the theory has not emerged. So if you wanted to continue in that line, then it's the emergent mode of theory development, where the structure emerges a bit later, much later in the process. And if you finish the advanced stage, of course, you end up with a mature theory. Okay, so as I said, the emergent mode here includes theoretical sampling in this case. Again, unfortunately, not enough time to go through theoretical sampling, but this is a type of sampling. Then there's targeted data collection. So remember, if you keep collecting data and keep discovering new categories the whole time, the study is never going to finish. So there's a way to sort of narrow it down over time. So it focuses on certain key categories, and that's what the targeted data collection is. Now you're collecting data only for the key categories that have emerged and nothing new, right? And similarly, you analyze only for the ones that have the most important ones. And then advanced memoing, which is you're really asking questions about, what are the links here? Okay, and the emergent mode essentially is mimicking the Glaserian approach. It is the organic emergence of theory. That's what you would have done if you did a Glaserian grounded theory. And it's suited to broad topics, as I said. So something like exploring ethics in AI, or what is the future of work going to look like, or designing for inclusion and so forth. They're really broad topics. it's more likely to work with emergent modes. Okay. And as I said, the structure starts to appear a lot more towards the end of the process. All right. Then the other one is the structured mode. So if the structure started to appear quite quickly, then you could go through, it looks pretty similar, except now when you're doing the data collection, you're bound by the theoretical structure. So you're only collecting data for what fits within that structure. You are analyzing only for what fits within that structure, not going outside of that structure. With the emergent mode, what can happen is you can still have a key category emerge quite a bit later in the process, can happen. And then advanced memoing as normal. This is closer to what is the Strauss-Corbinian approach, which is the structured grounded theory style of theory development. And it's suited to if your topic starting off was quite narrow. So if you're looking at, for example, investigating a specific practice called planning polka as an estimation practice, it's quite specific, right? So you're much likely to end up with the structure quite early on. And the idea to integrate it afterwards is basically you have all the structure there, but you still don't know what the whole overall storyline is. So the kind of things you ask is, what is this theory about? What phenomena is being explained by the theory, and so on. So that's option 2. So you only choose one of them, one of the two. All right. So having gone through the basic steps and the methods, we look at how can we go about applying this and what are the outcomes we can expect from it. So if you did all of it, which is the basic stage and the advanced stage, then you would have done a full grounded theory study, a full socio-technical grounded theory study, right? And it ends with a mature theory as an outcome. And if you've done only the basic stage, which is the first part, then you would have used socio-technical grounded theory for data analysis. And remember one of the scope confusion patterns I said? This is where we clarify the scopes. So you know what you're going in for. And the other funny thing is you might be going in for the whole thing, but by the time you finish with the basic stage, for whatever reason, you may decide, oh my God, this is not for me. Then at least you would have had some results, which you can still publish as partial results coming out of the theory. So, or rather the process, may not have the theory, but that's fine. You can still publish the partial results. So it can be an exit point in some extreme situations. Okay. I may skip this, if you will, but I will come back to if someone has a question. So this is about how you can apply it in various ways, a small, large, mixed with other methods, mixed in R&D studies, or as a part of a large program. That's all I'm going to say right now, but we can come back to this. All right, I'm going to go to evaluation. So many evaluation methods are checklist based. So they would ask things like, have you done, a list of things, have you done those things? What I'm proposing is a nuanced application, nuanced evaluation approach. So first off, it recognizes that we are really evaluating two different things. One, we're evaluating the application of the method. How well have you applied grounded theory, right? And the other is what is the outcome. So we're assessing the outcome, which is the theory or the partial results. So that's the first level of nuancing, is separating out those two things, right? And then we also do another level of nuancing, which is, are we assessing partial results or a mature theory? So just stay with me here. This is criteria for evaluating the method application. So two criteria. One is the credibility. So you're asking questions like, how were the participants recruited? What initial sampling technique was applied? And how was theoretical sampling applied? How were the memos written, and so on? This is for the basic stage. But if you went on to, if you're presenting a mature theory, then a reviewer would ask further questions. Then they would ask, how were the research protocols refined through the iterations? Because they're meant to be, refined over time. Which mode of theory development did you use? Was it the emergent one or was it the structured one? How was theoretical saturation achieved? Now, notice you don't have to ask how theoretical saturation was achieved if all they are showing is partial results. That's all they're reporting. There's no point asking how saturation was. And I see there's a lot of times reviewers, using a checklist approach, They'll ask, was theoretical saturation achieved? And sometimes authors are pressured into, yes, 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 it was. When the study isn't finished yet. You don't have to do that. You have to, be honest with your process. So this nuanced framework allows for that honesty to come through, hopefully. Then the second one is rigor. So we want to know how well you applied it, not just that you applied it, but how well you applied it. And that's to do with examples of the basic coding included in the paper. So one of the things you'll notice in the exemplar papers I've shown is a lot of them have actually included at least one example of the grounded theory coding in the paper itself. And then embedding of sanitized evidence. So this is again a very hallmark of grounded theory papers, is heaps of quotations which are anonymized and sanitized, right? And these are ways in which you can show to the reviewers that this is indeed based on grounded real world empirical evidence without breaking confidentiality rules that you have with your participants. And for mature theories, of course, you also want to be able to show evidence of theory development. So you may, for example, be sharing examples of your memoing, right? How did you memo? And from that memoing, how did the links come up and so on? So that's the method. And then there's the outcome. So the actual outcome. So again, as I said, we're going to nuance it. If the paper presents partial outcomes or preliminary theory, then we judge it on the basis of originality, relevance, and density, okay, of the categories. For mature theories, that's not enough. Original's not enough, it needs to be novel. For mature theories, relevance is not enough, it needs to be useful. So you need to start sort of, put in recommendations for practice and so on, where you start to put it into how is it going to help practitioners. Parsimony is a little bit more than density, which is to say, in the most compact way possible, is it able to put, conceptualize and show essentially what is pages and pages and pages of data in one model diagram, for example, or in one theory statement, and then a paper or whatever you've written in a very elegant and succinct way that is also rich and very condensed. And then the final one, which is separate for mature theories, is you should be able to see some flexibility in there, which is modifiability. So grounded theories are stand the test of time, not by being, immovable in time, in that you don't have to be able to show like, oh, this is grounded theory from 20 years ago, it still holds exactly the same way. That's not the test of time. For grounded theories, the test is, can it be modified and still make sense with the new data in this context in today's world? That is the beauty of grounded theory, if it is modifiable for different contexts. Okay, so now I'm going to give you 10 reasons to try socio-technical grounded theory, okay? So this is totally not a sales pitch, but I am under time pressure, okay? Otherwise, I would have gone through a much more cajoling and different approach. So hopefully, I should have a hopefully at the beginning of all these statements. It's simple for software researchers to understand and apply. This is one software and socio-technical grounded theory method to follow. So visualize in one simple process diagram. There are not three to make sense of, so just one. It clearly lists the prerequisite knowledge and skills required, right? So you're not going in blindfolded and then be in for a rude surprise. They actually tell you what to do and how to prep and then get into it. Delay the decision making about theory development because you're new to this. How can you decide which mode to choose when you don't even know what this thing is, the whole thing is about? So go through the basic stage, get some experience, then you're a much better place to decide, oh, is this looking emergent or is this looking structured? So that's the two choices. And then we have also got different application scopes. So you can do the whole study ending with a theory, or you can do it only the data analysis ending with some categories. You can do it standalone, or you can do it combined. Choice of different research worldviews. So for those familiar, you can do it with a positivist or constructivist or pragmatic. I have my own favorites. We all have our own favorites, but it's not married to any particular research paradigm. You can leverage modern data types and sources, right? Which is very relevant to our particular field. It encourages interdisciplinary studies of socio-technical phenomena. So as I talked about before, you can have a team of people working on this. And there's the nuanced evaluation guidelines. that makes a difference between, differentiates between partial and full results. Some research topics. I get asked this quite a lot. It's like, oh, Rashina, I want to do a grounded theory study. Can you suggest a topic? So here we go. Choose as you like. Kind of a research agenda. Role of ethics in AI, super important right now. A lot of people looking at it, but grounded theory, I've got a PhD student that's actually just started, and I know some others might be doing the same. Future of work, what's future work going to look like in a hopefully post-pandemic world very soon, digitalized to the max? What's society going to look like, families and software and the use of software going to look like, as one of our keynotes talked about. Then there's the human aspect, so personality, gender, age, values, and how that's going to affect software teams, the process itself, the design of the software. Social aspects, so collaboration, coordination, diversity, for the formation of teams. Socio-technical aspects, you pick up any software engineering practice as a socio-technical practice. Code reviews, backlog refinement, estimation, how do any of these work, and go into and do an in-depth dive into it with theory development. Designing for inclusive user experience, human-centered AI design, understanding human in the loop. All of these are questions that beg for deep investigations. So you really need to understand the problem space before the team can jump into the solution mode and start developing tools. So really need to sink in and understand the problem first. And grounded theory allows you to do that. So role of social media, for example, in political campaigns and crisis management and social work, any of those. Setting virtual collaborations in online education, massively multiplayer online games, professional training, all of these very relevant right now. Impact of digitalization and technology in all of these areas. You name one, it's been digitalized. But particularly interesting, aged care, mental health, and disability management, for example. And then one of my favorite genre is meta software engineering research. So can we really ask the big questions? I want people to ask the big questions. Can grounded theory help with understanding the new nature of reality, right? Human reality, where we work with natural reality, virtual, augmented, whatnot. What does it mean as a human to be living in this era right now? So looking at an ontology. Role of the researcher, right? And how they interpret research. Research paradigm bias in reviewing. Okay, so if you're a positivist reviewer, reviewing work that is constructivist, what kind of biases can creep in? There's an excellent paper that's just come out on surfacing research paradigms from underneath studies, and this was a review and which won the Distinguished Paper Award at Chase. So highly recommend people to look that one up. Very, very good work there. Role of ethics in research. Why should we only look at ethics in software development? We should ask that of ourselves. And I have to ask, I actually thank reviewer one. I don't know if you're here, but if you're here, thank you for bringing this up in my review of my paper. Definitely very, very important to ask a question about role of ethics in research and reimagining research for contemporary times and so on. Okay, so to recap quickly, we looked at who, the what, the why, and the how. And because I'll probably forget later, let me just quickly acknowledge for the feedback on the software engineering grounded theory method, Peggy, Philippe Crafton, John, Klaas, Christoph, Zainab, Steve, Ingo, and my reviewers 1 and 2, my anonymous reviewers. Thank you so much for your feedback. For the early influences on grounded theory, there's James, Stuart, George, and Angela. And of course, for the gift of grounded theory, the method, Barney Glaser, Anselm Strauss, Julian Cobbin, and Kathy Chalmers. Cool. What we're going to do now is I'm going to open it up. Wow, there are lots of comments. We'll see how we want to go about this, but I'll open up the floor and we can get back later.
Thank you, Rashina. If you want, I can help here because I have summarized all the questions that appear in the chat because there are questions and comments overlapping or intertwined. And I have selected the questions, and if you want, I can give the word to the attendees so that they can rephrase the questions personally. We have like 10 minutes.
Amazing, thank you.
Yeah, I will help you on that. Just to manage the time, we have 10 minutes in theory. In the meantime, I contacted the organizers and they said that they can take 5-10 more minutes in the cloud R if you need this time for the discussion. I mean, we don't need to cut exactly at 15, but we can cut at 20 or 25 at most, okay? This may also help.
Awesome, thank you so much, Xavier.
Okay, then I will, just let me know if I forget any question. Also, if you think that the question that was made in the chat has been answered during the technical briefing, feel free just to withdraw the question. But in the order, I have the following ones.
Okay.
First one is from Mauricio Nietzsche. What is the main difference between many qualitative studies within our community and the grounded theory studies? The steps authors follow seem to be the same as the pictures you just showed. I don't know, Mauricio, if you want to clarify the question or if you think it is answered.
Hey, sorry, so I did get the, oh, hey, go for it.
Yeah, okay.
Hello.
Mauricio,
hello,
hi.
Mauricio.
Hi. Thanks, Hashina, for the nice presentation.
Thank you.
My question is, we see a lot of qualitative papers out there, and they do seem to follow kind of all the steps that you mentioned, but they just don't post this as a theory. Why do you think that is, and what's the difference between those papers and grounded theory papers?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So there are heaps of qualitative methods out there. There's, case studies, survey research can be done in a qualitative way. You can have interview-based studies and so forth. I think the biggest differentiating factor is the actual data analysis procedures of grounded theory. So sadly, because of the format and the size of the technical briefing, we couldn't go into an example of the actual coding, but the coding is where the rigor and the systematic nature of it lies. So when you're collecting data, right, it's iterative and incremental and it's interleaved. So what I mean by that is you would collect a little bit of data, you analyze that, then you go back and see what is the, what are the results that are emerging. Based on that, you can collect new data and even refine the questions a little bit, collect some more, and then that spirals in. This kind of a iterative and interleaved nature of isn't really found so much in some of the other qualitative methods, where most of them, what they will do is, if I take a software engineering example, so grounded theory is a lot, one of the most agile research methods out there. All right, so iterative and incremental. With some of the other ones, what they'll do is they collect all of the data and then do all of the analysis, right? So it's very phase-wise. It's like waterfall in a way, right? So you do the data collection, Now what that means is you may still get really interesting findings, but what is missing is that research or reflection and that iterative nature where you're, the theory truly emerges from the process. So that I think is the main distinction why you get such rich findings from grounded theories compared to some of the others.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Second question from Easan Rao. I hope to have pronounced well the name. You referred to slide 10 from the presentation, and the question was, apart from human and social, how can we apply grounded theory in software artifacts like in source code or documentation? Can we use grounded theory in these scenarios?
Sorry, Xavier, can I just ask where you're reading from? Sometimes it's a lot easier when I can see it in text at the same time.
Well, it is in the middle of the chat. But
okay, never mind.
What I can do is to copy, because I have this text in a Word file that I was creating. I can copy right now the question in the chat. So
you're a pro, way too organized. Amazing. Thank you.
Welcome. And in any case, the person who made the question can jump into if you.
Okay. So apart from the human and social, how can we apply artifacts like, nice. Okay. So at the very basic level, you can apply the grounded theory procedures to anything that is text-based. So if you can put it in a text format, you can analyze it, right? So if you have documentation in particular, that's text, yeah? You can conduct studies on, say, the quality of documentation or what type of information can be captured from documentation and so forth, because essentially it comes back to being in a text format and you can apply the procedures. With regards to the code, it depends on what you're looking at. I think that's an excellent suggestion, something I haven't thought of myself in terms of, can we do a grounded theory on the actual source code? One thing that I can think of is perhaps if you did a study looking at the naming of variables and so on, and then perhaps even looking at how that compares to the team culture, for instance, right? So if you've got, I don't know, Hobbit fans out there, does that translate into some of the naming conventions that go into making variables or fun stuff like that? But perhaps more serious stuff as well. So anything that is text-based is easy material for grounded theory.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to the next question. I also, well, it's not a question, but a pointer for making the question, I guess, from Charles Ware. Please, could you return to the list of papers at slide 11?
Okay, sure. Hang on, let me see how to,
and
do I
Charles,
do this?
you can make the question, Charles, directly once she's there.
I'm trying to do this in the most painless way, but
it's not easy, yeah.
Oh.
Maybe you can
Sorry,
go outside
folks.
the present. You can go outside the presentation
Yeah.
mode, and I think that you can just share.
Good idea.
The PowerPoint file.
Yeah.
11 red.
Okay.
Yeah.
Number 11? Sure. Just a second. Number 11. Can you see this?
Not yet.
Share
Not
again.
yet. Okay, I'll have to share again. Hang on. Okay, can you see it now?
Yeah, back a bit,
Yeah.
I think.
Okay, so this was 11, but let's go back. 10, this one here. And okay, I think I know what you mean. This list here?
There you are, yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, you just want to have a look. Oh, no worries. Cool.
Okay, I thought there was one question also too. Okay, but in
Take
fact, we have
a
Charles
screen.
here.
Yeah, take a screenshot.
Yeah, done. I'll
Awesome.
tweet it if anyone wants it.
But since we have Charles here, the next question is also from him. As you can see in the chat now, Rashina.
Yeah, just picking it up. Okay, is there any way to deal with the statistics of structured theory development? You can't make predictions because there's no new data. Okay. I might need you to clarify a little bit on the prediction side, but if I get you right, it's not that there's no new data. It's likely that there are no new key categories emerging. Okay, so you may still have, you know, the outline or the skeletal structure of the theory emerges really quickly. So you kind of know what the main categories are going to be, but they're not rich. So the rest of the theory development becomes an act of making them rich and making them saturated. The overarching skeletal structure more or less remains the same. So you're not expecting another limb to come out afterwards. And if I may take that analogy further, so that's what the structured one is. But if you wanted to clarify, I'm happy to.
Okay, so you're not talking about getting numbers out of your coding or anything like that. This is more expanding your understanding of the categories that exist.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'll give you an example. So for example, if you were looking at, say, estimation as a practice, yeah? And the way you set up the study in the beginning, you set it up to look at what is estimation, who is involved in estimation, when does it happen, what are the challenges, what are the solutions. More or less, those will be the key categories. The way you've set it up, you know, to be, so it's structured starting up. And so the categories are kind of already there, but you don't know the details. You don't know who's involved. So the rest of the act is then figuring out the rich details of who is it. And then also, how does the who interact with the when? How does the when interact with the challenges and so on, right? So the relationships between those categories. But the key ideas, the main big headings are kind of already staring you in the face after the basic data collection and analysis stage.
Okay, Burak just put a follow-up question in the chat. Constant comparison is sort of cross-validation.
Hey, Burak, how are you, buddy?
Hello. Yeah, actually, that was kind of a comment that just came up to me for Charles' good question. I mean, when you do constant comparison and you iterate the theory, I think that might be some sort of a statistical validation. I don't know, just to throw it as an idea for Rashina.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think it definitely can be a form of cross-validation. So if you've used multiple sources of data, right? So you've done some interviews, you've done some observations, you've got the project documentation, and you're constantly comparing across the sources, it can definitely be a source of cross-validation. But that's not its only purpose, though. In fact, constant comparison is the prime mechanism through which the theory develops from levels of abstraction. So starting off with the raw data, then you extract the themes into, you extract the kind of key points into these codes. Then from the similar codes combine to form concepts, similar concepts combine to form categories, right? So this, raising in the levels of abstraction is possible only because of constant comparison. So it's the key mechanism, but yes, if you are doing it across multiple data sources, then it can also be a very good sort of source of cross-validation. Yeah, thanks for that.
Thank you. Next question is also from Burak, so don't mute yourself yet. How are modern data integrated in grounded theory processes?
I think this was answered, shall we?
Okay.
Well, but if you want to elaborate on that, yeah.
Very quick example. So one of my students is probably in the call here somewhere, Kashumi, is working on emotions of software developers, right? So she did sentiment analysis, and there is no reason why you can't be doing a grounded theory that looks at interview data and then also then compares it with sentiment analysis to get a richer understanding of the emotions of a team. So this is how you can start to incorporate some of the more modern data sources, but also through natural language processing of, say, the publicly available open source repositories where you've got heaps and heaps of data. And of course, kind of limited by the manual nature of it. Hopefully someone somewhere is working on making this to a point where we can start to automate some of this and then really scale in size for socio-technical grounded theories. But yeah, we're I think with socio-technical grounded theory, we're hopefully moving into an era where we're really pushing the limits of what traditional grounded theory used to be able to do.
Okay, next question comes from Alessio Ferrari. What about data sharing? Alessio, you are here,
yeah.
If you want to clarify.
Yeah, I may have entered late, so you may have covered this already, but yeah, the question is just, we are sharing, we are pushed to share all the data in our more technical, let's say more technical, well, wrong word, but like in the other types of research, more quantitative. So I would like to know if there is a way to standardize sharing not just the interviews, but also something about the process, the memos, and all this large bunch of data that you can.
Thank you so much for that question. It is so relevant right now. In fact, and not to scare people, but if you haven't looked at ICSI 2022 evaluation criteria yet, it lists the regular criteria, but it also lists the open science policy, which is now requiring all data to be shared by, so expected to be shared by default. Otherwise, you have to provide an explanation. Now, I'm sure, I've just come across this, so I'm going to be talking to people and trying to understand what's going on there. And hopefully there is a bit of room for interpretation to be accommodating to all types of research, including qualitative research. So for those of you who are wondering what the problem is, yes, Xavier, thanks for that. Oh, that's the paper. Yeah, thank you. So for those of you who are wondering what the problem is, basically when we go out into the industry and get people to really open up their hearts and experiences about life and professional work, there is a big, there's a big confidentiality contract, right? There's a part of ethics. You say, I'm not going to be sharing any of what you tell me other than in a format that cannot be traced back to the individual or the company. Right? So that is the trust that you have with your participants, which is why they share these, really sometimes very interesting, juicy details with you, right? But then at the other end, when you're going to review things, the reviewers, in the spirit of open science, again, I think it's well-intentioned. They say, all right, give us all the data. How do we know you've actually done this? So then qualitative researchers and grounded theory researchers are kind of caught in the middle. They're like, but I promised, but I have to, right? So one of the ways I've been able to float through this so far, and I've seen other people do it, is what I said before. At least one working example of open coding right from raw data all the way up to category. All right. And usually if you do that really well, that's enough evidence to show you know what you're doing, the data is there, and the others would have emerged in a similar way. Okay. But you need to really invest in that example and do a good job of presenting it, right? The second part is in your actual presentation, instead of giving just aggregated concepts, sometimes people run out of space, but I think the beauty of grounded theory papers is the actual quotations that you share, right? So we are allowed those as long as you don't reveal any of the individual's details or the company details. It serves two purposes. One is credibility. It offers credibility to what you've done. While you cannot share all of the data, here are heaps of quotations or enough pertinent quotations about each of the concepts throughout the paper that the reviewer can be satisfied, yes, there is actual real data underneath this. This is not being made up, right? And the second is the experience. It's from, you just don't want to read a researcher's narrative. You want to listen, like, as an analogy, from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So the verbatim quotes then add to the richness of the experience of reading a grounded theory paper. So those are two ways that I always use in my papers, and I see them being used in papers that do well. But with regards to this particular new, new open science policy that has been added on, I think I'm going to have a word to try and make sure that it's, I'm sure it's, as I said, it's intentioned well, but I hope it's also written in a way that does not scare qualitative researchers away. Yeah. See what we can do.
Yes, I think that you have provided very good advices here. And a last question, just for the sake of time, that I'm writing in the chat from Theo Zimmerman about the software. There were two suggestions from the audience about NVivo and Atlas TI. But anyhow, it would be great to know your opinion or your experience.
Oh, Theo, you've really caught me on the bad one. So NVivo is really good. Atlas I hear is good. I get most of my students use NVivo. And why I say you've caught me really good is I am still old school. I do my pen and paper and I do my Excel sheets. Oh my God.
I hear you.
Hi.
So,
I won't say you are old school, because after reading some advice on the net about software, and someone saying, well, for grounded theory, if you are starting, you should maybe do it with like traditional methods. We just decided for our first grounded theory study to just put use some LibreOffice text document with 2 columns, copy the document, and then put the code on the other column. So this works.
Excellent. Okay. No, completely agree. And the analogy I tend to use here is it's like, when you drive your car, it's fine to know how to drive your car and it's automatic and all of that, but you should also know the under the hood stuff, right? So you should be able to like really if you can drive it manual, you can definitely drive it automatic. So it's kind of, makes sense with some of the people, but the paper, and there's nothing that there's something so amazing about printing an actual interview out, so 7-8 pages, whatever it is, going on the margins and just doing that and being able to flip back and forth is amazing for constant comparison, right? Because you go like, it's the same concept here, all right, and it's the same one over here. It's so much easier, the tangible nature of paper. It's amazing.
Okay, thank you so much. And I think that now we have exceeded 10 minutes, the allocated time. We need to start to finalize this technical briefing, even if there were a couple of further questions emerging, but please, I beg your pardon to the attendees, and I need to really finalize this as a moderator. I think that I speak for the whole audience to thank you very much for this incredibly excellent tutorial. Maybe I can watch it again in the mirroring program because I really enjoy it. thank you very much, Rashina, for this very well-prepared piece of research. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And very, very quickly, yes, Charles, you're right about the sustainability and paper. My bad. I try to print two-sided, if that helps, and only once. But also the fact that there's a link in the chat for the feedback. It's not very long. Please do fill it up so I can try and improve this tutorial. I don't know about you. For me, honestly, it felt a little bit rushed. I typically like to tell stories as I go and interact as I go. So let me know how you felt, which parts maybe I could cut out or whatever, or add in. But thank you so much for being here and for being part of this. Really appreciate it. And thank you, Xavier, for being the sense maker here, especially of all the things in the chat.
Thank you, did my best. Thank you very much. And bye-bye, everyone, and see you around in the flamenco class or in any other interesting event. Thank you. And please, Rashina, don't forget to send me the link with the recording now when you stop. So you will receive an email and then send to me. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Cool. Bye.